Welcome to The Rest of the Moose,
Where's the rest of this moose?
a podcast about anything and everything.
You must have hated this moose.
Here's your host, Chris Crum.
And today we are going to talk about the moose, for real. Because as this podcast grows and evolves, every once in a while you'll see me do a movie review. And I don't go to the movies as much as I used to. And one of the reasons is because audiences just piss me off. If I'm being completely candid with you, I hate going to a movie and being distracted by rude people. And sadly, it's hard to go to one without that. And I also have an amazing home theater where I can watch films, and usually they come out on video the day after they're released in the theaters anyway. But I can watch them at home and enjoy them a lot more. But I'm going to talk about, in a series of podcasts over the next months and years, about some of my favorite films of the past, and I'll do an occasional review of new movies. But since this podcast is named after something that happens in the movie Arthur, I thought it might be fun to revisit that film and tell you why I love it so much and why I think it's such a brilliant movie. It is, to me, a 5-star film. And there are so many reasons that it could be. And when you combine them all, it might be a 6-star film. And I only go to 5. But it's just there's so many great things about the film that could by themselves make it a 5-star film. And we'll start with Dudley Moore playing Arthur. That is a role that he was born to play. And he had a lot of other great films throughout his career. And many people don't realize he was also a wonderful pianist. And he plays a little bit in the movie, just kind of goofing around. But he was a concert-level classical pianist and played with some symphonies and was incredibly talented by that alone. But his portrayal of Arthur was so spot on. And for those of you that have never seen the movie, the basic premise is Arthur Bach is a millionaire, probably billionaire, drunk. And he goes from girl to girl and picks up hookers on the streets and does all these horrible things drinking. But everybody loves him. But it gets to a point where his family's tired of it, and another wealthy family wants him to marry their daughter. So the two wealthy families kind of conspire and say, Arthur, you're going to marry this girl, or we're going to take away your millions and millions and millions of dollars. And that is basically the premise of the film. And of course, he's not in love with the girl that they want him to marry. He's in love with somebody else, played by the great Liza Minnelli. And so that is the whole premise of the movie Arthur. He's drunk because he's unhappy. And they probably couldn't make this movie today because, you know, we can't make fun of drinking and of alcoholics and that kind of thing anymore. But he never really makes fun of it in that way. It's really more of a tool to show his sadness and to show what he's missing in his life. And I don't want to spoil the ending, but I think you can probably kind of figure out where that's going. And really, even if you know the entire plot, the movie is still charming and hilarious and everything else. But it has an incredible heart, and I think that comes from all of the actors, but primarily Dudley Moore and his portrayal, because it would have been very easy for him to go too over the top with the role. And he gets right to the edge, but never quite goes over the cliff with his portrayal. And Arthur is a hilarious figure, but he's also a very tragic figure. And one of my favorite lines in the film is when he's having dinner with the woman that he's supposed to marry, Susan, and he's drinking heavily and she's eating her dinner. And at one point, she says, a real woman could stop you from drinking. And he jokingly says it would have to be a really big woman. And then he pauses for a minute and he says what's one of my favorite lines in all of movies. He says, not all of us that drink are poets. Some of us drink because we're not poets. And that's a very profound line. And it really describes his mental state. Is he's drinking because he's sad. Some of us overeat because we're sad, or we take drugs because we're, and I'm not excusing any of that. I'm just saying sometimes sadness triggers a reaction. And Arthur is unhappy, and that is why he is the way he is. And so you get a lot of comedy, but you also get a lot of heart. And the other big emotional heart of the film comes from Sir John Gielgud, who plays Arthur's butler, Hobson. And he is both hilarious and heartbreaking at the same time. And his journey through the film is also the role of the surrogate father to Arthur, because Arthur's real father's in the movie, but he wants to sell him off to the other family. Hobson is more of a father than Arthur will ever have from his real father. And that kind of plays into the last reel of the film, if you will, in how that whole relationship and dynamic plays out. But the acting across the board is incredible. Dudley Moore, Liza Minnelli, and John Gielgud, who are the main trio, are just phenomenal. But then you take the bit players, Susan's father, and the whole scene with the moose, which I'm only going to touch on briefly because you'll understand where this podcast came from when you see the film. If you've never seen the scene with the moose, it is absolutely hilarious. But that scene would not have played as well had it not been Dudley Moore and the actor who played Susan's father. Arthur's family, and particularly his grandmother, just absolutely hilarious and perfectly cast. And then it's also another film where there's not a wasted scene. And there's a lot of times where certain movies and Broadway shows are guilty of this too. I'm looking at you, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, is one example of, for structure purposes, needing to fill some time. And so they come up with a scene or something that happens that didn't need to be there, but they needed it to fill an extra few minutes. And to me, that's just wasted time. And maybe it's entertaining, maybe it's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily have to be there. Every single scene in Arthur is there for a reason and means something to the story, but also maintains your interest. You know, and there are times in certain films where you find yourself kind of tuning out for a while because you're going, yeah, okay, this is okay, but I'm really not that interested in it. Arthur doesn't ever let you have that feeling because everything is linked together and everything maintains that level of interest, whether you're laughing or you're crying. It really is just brilliantly done and brilliantly written. Well acted. Everything about the film is just so well put together that's why it's one of my favorite movies. And yes, it's funny, but it also has that incredible heart. And I think that's what makes it a classic. And if you've never watched Arthur, and by the way, I'm talking about, as you might have guessed, the Dudley Moore version. There was a more recent remake with Russell Brand that I don't even watch because I've heard from other people it's not nearly as good. And I just don't want to tarnish the memory of just a wonderful film. If you've never seen Arthur, do yourself a favor, even if you have to pay $5.99 or whatever to rent it, and check out the film. It's one of my favorites, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. And then you'll understand about the rest of the Moose.
You've been listening to the Rest of the Moose podcast, hosted by Chris Grum.
Why don't you forget the moose for a moment?
Previous episodes are available online at chrisgrum.com. See you next time for the Rest of the Moose.